Know that Downy gives you that April fresh smell. But you may not know that Downy can be quite economical to use. Just this little bit does a whole wash load. The other leading liquid recommends nearly twice as much. So depending on the size you use, you need about 2 of these bottles to do the work of 1 bottle of Downy. And Downy gives you that April fresh smell, too. April.
That's it to me anyway. When I read it. You're one excommunicant, and you're...
Resigned.
No, he's not, he's been disfellowshipped.
Disfellowship and excommunication are the same thing.
Well, what are you? You're a backslider.
Protection that lasts. New Secret Roll-On helps check wetness better. So I stay dry and fresh. All day, all evening.
Sounds good enough for me.
Sorry, Secret's pretty scent means it's just for me. New improved Secret Roll-On. Strong enough for a man, but made for a woman.
Coming up next, Webster.
Good morning. There's trouble in the paradise of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's no longer the solid phalanx of the faithful, 144,000 of whom alone will stand by the side of God after being born again. I have in my studio this morning Peter Gregerson, who is regarded now by the witnesses as an antichrist because he resigned and was involved in a great kerfuffle at the top levels of the Board of Governors over the resignation of another man. I also have here Jim Penton from Lethbridge, Alberta, he is an excommunicant for his actions, apparently, which upset the ruling bodies of the Watchtower Society. Not often you get these kind of cracks in an organization which many people look at and think, now there's a solid group. They know what they're doing and where they're going. Maybe it's not the same today. Then in another form of delinquency, we have got the Commissioner of Corrections from British Columbia, Bernard Robinson, and his associate, Peter Whelan, who are going to explain to us the new, or potentially the new mini criminal code for young offenders in Canada. And for light relief, if you consider the Liberal government's light relief, we have John Evans, who has the difficult task of being Parliamentary Secretary to the man whom many people think brought in Canada's worst ever budget, save and except Walter Gordon, one Alan McEachin. That's Mr. Evans. But we're going to start off the top this morning with the man who is regarded as an antichrist by some, and the man who was excommunicated from the Watchtower Society. After the break. I've always had a sneaking regard for the Jehovah's Witnesses, not merely because of their incredible dedication and standing on wet, miserable street corners with the little Watchtower pamphlet, not merely because of their incredible organization when they hold massive conventions, but because they fought the padlock law in Duplessis, Quebec, and they fought the Nazis, and many of them were put in gas chambers. But it seems that despite this dedication, which may have gone too far in some cases, there's considerable trouble. Big cracks at the top in the ruling body, the hierarchy, the Cardinal Council, if you like. And I'm going to get Peter Gregerson from Gadsden, Alabama, to tell me why you are regarded by some of the high-level Jehovah's Witnesses as an antichrist. What happened to you? What caused you to lose your faith in Jehovah's Witnesses?
Well, I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. From the time I was 3 years old, my dad was a very devout witness, and my whole life was centered around being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I shared in a number of the activities of the higher Jehovah's Witnesses. At one point in 1976, after they had more or less predicted the end of the world for 75, the governing body called in about 50 elders from the United States to ask them what was the problem. Why are we losing young people? Why are elders quitting? What's wrong with our meetings and our literature and so on? And for several days, I had a chance for the first time to find out that the problems of the Watchtower were not just in Alabama, but that the spiritual paradise that they talk about was riddled with problems.
You decided their teaching was false.
I found out that there were men at the top that did not believe some of it, and then I started a research program of my own that led me for a couple of years through many things that convinced me that Jehovah's Witnesses could not possibly be what they claimed to be.
Let's take first the predictions of the end of the world. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. On the second coming, it was to be in 1870-something, wasn't it?
1874.
And then it was to be in 1920-something.
Well, at first Jesus came back in 1874, then they changed that to 1914.
And then they changed it again till 1975.
Well, no, there's two different things that they predict. One is the return of Christ, and one is the end of the world. They started out by saying that the last days started in 1799, that Christ returned in 1874, that he began ruling as king in 1878, and that the end of the world would occur in 1914. Then, as those things didn't happen, they changed it all and said, no, what really happened is that Christ returned in 1914, and the end of the world will come in 1918. Then they changed it to 1925, then 1942, then 1975, and they still have a big problem in that area. When will the end of the world come? Armageddon.
And when people argued against this in the higher level, were they guilty of heresy?
Yes, indeed.
Now tell me about Franz, Raymond Franz, I think it was, who was one of the governing body until comparatively recently, and who was thrown out because he associated with you.
He was not only a member of the governing body, but he was one of the major writers for the Watchtower Society. He was in charge of producing the main reference work of Jehovah's Witnesses, Aid to Bible Understanding, and a number of the other books of recent years were written or directed by him. He had some problems with the matter of grace. Should a Christian earn his salvation, or is it really a matter of his faith in Jesus Christ?
Oh, I thought if you had the proper witness to his faith, you became one of the 144,000 alone who stood at the side of God after the great day of judgment.
Well,
is that nonsense?
It is nonsense.
That you are the Antichrist. How dare you say that when this is the dogma of this very powerful organization?
Well, it's true. It's not a very funny thing when you're going through it. If you've been raised as a part of it, and all your life you've been conditioned to believe that whatever they say is true, it's a very agonizing experience to come back out of that brainwashed condition.
After a lifetime with the witnesses, Franz, this big shot, and the witnesses resigned, had coffee with you, or ate in your restaurant, or ate with you, and he was promptly disfellowshipped.
He was pushed out of the governing body. He had no money. I was a friend of his, offered him a place to live in Alabama where I live. We gave him a few days' work in a supermarket outfit that I am a partner in, and so I was a landlord to him. I was a direct employer, and technically, according to the rules of the Watchtower, you can eat with an Antichrist as long as there's an employer-employee relationship.
You can?
Yes. That's an interesting little sidelight. But at any rate, we did eat dinner together. One person pointed it out, took it to the elders. They communicated with Brooklyn, and the result was that this man, after 40 years, of tremendous effort for Jehovah's Witnesses, was thrown over for one charge and one charge only. He ate with a wicked man. And as he told them, he said, if you can show me that Peter is a wicked man, I will humbly crave for forgiveness. I will never eat with him. I will never talk to him.
But by that time, he was disillusioned about the whole deal.
Well, to some degree he was. That's true. Indeed, yes.
Now we come to the Canadian. You are a Canadian.
Yes, I am.
And your name is Jim Penton.
Penton.
Penton,
Right.
from Lethbridge, Alberta.
Right.
You were excommunicated by the witnesses. When? Because you were on my program some years ago as a devout, dedicated, glassy-eyed witness.
That's right. Too glassy-eyed at the
All right.
time.
Why were you excommunicated?
I began to see some of the same things that Peter Gregerson saw. I had written one book on Jehovah's Witnesses respecting the fight for freedom in this country against the Duplessis government, War Measures Act, and so forth. Then I began to research another book on Jehovah's Witnesses, an overall study of the movement. And wherever I went, I saw fantastic oppression of a sort that was mind-boggling to me, particularly directed against intellectuals, professional persons, against anyone who claimed to have a heavenly hope. You see, the Watchtower Society said that the 144,000 were chosen by 1935, and only replacements for persons who had become wicked would be chosen by the Holy Spirit to go to heaven after that.
There was only a few places left.
Only a few places left, and I started proclaiming that I had a heavenly hope, and that got the dander up of some people. And then I saw that people who were mentally ill were being disfellowshipped because the Watchtower Society or the elders said that they were demonized. I saw people being removed as elders because they came back from holidays wearing beards. I know of a case in Ottawa of a woman who was taken back into one of these judicial committees, and she was questioned so severely that she collapsed, had to go to hospital. I became horrified.
An inquisition.
An inquisition, absolutely. And then I saw this take place with respect to my own family, my own son. His little girl had a very serious congenital disease. He had to spend a lot of time with her. The circuit servant came to the congregation. He was working full-time, going to university, and spending a lot of time with this sick child. His wife was a nervous wreck. The circuit overseer said, if he doesn't increase his hours in knocking at the doors, we remove him. And the elders in the congregation simply went along with this like a bunch of clowns.
Was he disfellowshipped?
He resigned. He and our daughter-in-law resigned.
You mean regardless of what his problems were, he had to stand at the corner and knock on the doors, or he was not a proper servant of Jehovah?
That's right. And
mental cases were questioned on potential heretical beliefs?
Absolutely. And I can document that. And I am doing so. I'm writing a book on the whole thing.
The anti-intellectualism, you had an interesting point on that. Now, if I'm a Jehovah's Witness, which is highly unlikely, but if I am, can I read the Bible at my will and pleasure without supervision?
The Watchtower Society within the last couple of years has said that you cannot understand the Bible without using the literature of the Watchtower Society, and some members of the governing body in Brooklyn have given specific orders for the workers at the Watchtower factory not to get together in study groups to study the Bible independently.
Give me that quote on anti-intellectualism, and what does it come from?
It comes from the September 8th, 1968 Awake, and it says, those who belong to the professional classes may be said to be fair samples of the fruitage of higher education. They form a sort of aristocracy of learning. Often they are proud, untouched by the needs of less fortunate people, opinionated, competitive, independent, and inconsiderate of others. They have deeply imbibed the godless theory of evolution. In their view, educated men, college and university trained, are the sole hope for progress. Who, for example, have substituted for the fine moral teaching of the Bible their human philosophies? Is it not the professional clergyman? And who are the ones today that are insistent upon having their own way and openly flouting the authority of God's word in the matter of the sacredness of blood?
The Watchtower line is, if you're opinionated, educated, and competitive, and even thought about evolution, you are not a fit member of the Watchtower Society.
If you think for yourself, you're not regarded as a proper Jehovah's Witness.
At what stage were you excommunicated?
I was excommunicated in the spring of 1981, but I had left about a year before that.
Did that personally damage you being excommunicated, or were you free of the chains by that time?
Well, psychologically it didn't damage me.
Because you are a university professor.
That's right. But a great many...
How could you have got into it in the first place?
Like Peter Gregerson, I was raised in it, and one of the things that kept me with the organization for a long time, I suppose, is the pressure of outer society and the persecution that Jehovah's Witnesses experienced.
Because they had done some brave, brave things, had they not?
They have indeed.
Do you say now that they have a twisted outlook on God and the Bible?
Absolutely. There is no question. If there was even one chance in 1,000 that they could be right basically, I would have never brought it up to my children.
What's going to happen to the Watchtower Society? This is the first time within my long experience I've ever had anybody even criticize them from within, or recently within the organization. Peter Gregerson from Gadsden, Alabama, Jim Penton from Lethbridge, Alberta, after the break. Celebrated leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses, like this man Franz, who is now ostracized, have described the Jehovah's Witnesses as a hermetically sealed organization. Every doctrinal blip or scintilla of sin is closely monitored. Now, you've broken away.
Yes.
There's not a thread of witness left in you.
Oh.
Or is it? Shred.
How can you leave 50 years and just vacuum it out of your mind? It's a part of you, and that's why I needed to clean it up for my children and my grandchildren so they didn't carry that legacy.
Do you now believe that this organization is so damaging to individuals that you want to destroy it?
It isn't a matter of one. I have no particular interest one way or the other on destroying anything, but I want very much for people that were raised like I was as a part of it to have an opportunity to think, because I had a unique situation. I looked behind the kimono in New York. I was there at a special meeting. I had an opportunity to spend months of research that the ordinary person doesn't have time away from his job to do. I learned some things that I feel compelled to make available to other people.
Line them out, 1, 2, 3.
The most important thing with me in the beginning was if the Watchtower is what it claims to be, a term called a faithful and discreet slave, if it does have a divine appointment by God, then no matter that it abuses its authority from time to time, if God Himself has assigned that organization to be the feeder of spiritual food, then I'd have to go along with it.
You're telling me you've got to be a faithful and discreet slave?
Now, the Watchtower claims about itself that it is the faithful and discreet slave, that it is the only organization on earth, all other religions being of the devil, that in 1918 Christ Jesus came and deliberately examined the Watchtower in great detail, and in early 1919 came to the conclusion that no other organization had any standing before God and Jesus Christ, and that they alone were to dispense correct and accurate spiritual truth.
Do you regard this as outright bigotry?
I went back to check it. I went back and took the 1918 and 1919 time frame and said, if Jesus Christ came to this conclusion as a result of examining the spiritual food that was dispensed in that time period, I needed to find out about it myself. So I examined that evidence.
What you found disillusioned you?
Beyond belief. There is no way to describe the shock that I got as I started to go into the specifics of the things that were taught by Jehovah's Witnesses in 1918 and 1919. It's the most incredible experience I've ever had.
In brainwashing?
In the fantasies that were taught as the teachings of Jesus Christ. that the last days started in 1799, that Christ did indeed return in 1874, that he began ruling as king in 1878, that the end of the world would come in 1918, know that it'll come in 1925, know that all Jews would go back to Jerusalem, that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would begin ruling in the fall of 1925 at Jerusalem, that Revelation 12 describes the birth of a man-child that Jehovah's Witnesses now say is the kingdom. They said then it was the papacy, and it goes on and on and on with terrible untruths.
What kind of life was it to be a witness? They always seemed well-dressed, well-fed, well-organized, well-disciplined, great organization. What kind of life?
It was a doer life, a severe life, and you were always afraid of what was going to be said to you by the people in control, even the elders, and I was an elder.
For children, any Christmas celebrations?
No Christmas
Any
celebrations.
presents?
No presents, no birthday celebrations of any kind. The only thing that they celebrate are wedding anniversaries and the memorial of the Lord's death. And it's a very austere life, and the problem is that it goes beyond this. There are dress codes. For instance, I know many men who have had elders walk up to them and tell them to cut their sideburns shorter because they were too long, or to remove their mustache, or shave their beard. And
Did you have a mustache like that when you were in the witnesses?
Not quite like this. I've had a mustache for a good many years. I suppose I grew it partly because I said that as a free person I have a right to do what I like.
Do you feel a free person now?
I thank God that I'm free from that organization.
You're still a Christian.
You bet I am.
You?
Oh, yes. And I think he raised a very important point. I grew up believing the only happy people were Jehovah's Witnesses, that no true happiness could be found anywhere else on earth, and I found it to be exactly opposite of that.
What about blacks? Are there blacks in Jehovah's Witnesses?
Many.
Oh, there are many. Yeah. There's no discrimination at that level.
There's no discrimination at the lowest level. There is discrimination at the higher level.
Dogma changes briefly in the last few years.
Dogma changes unbelievably. To give you an example, Jack, up until 1969, the Watchtower allowed people to have organ transplants, such as cornea transplants, kidney transplants. Then suddenly, from 69 to 1980, it became cannibalism and impermissible. My mother-in-law, who is now 86, went 10 years ago, and the doctor told her she needed a cornea transplant. Since then, when our whole family left, she has left as well, but she went back to the doctor. Now she could have a cornea transplant according to Watchtower dogmatism, and the doctor now says it's too late. And this sort of thing has happened over and over again. Marriages have been ruined.
Blood. What about blood transfusions?
Well, it's another one of those inconsistencies of the Watchtower. They say abstain from blood, but yet you can use blood particles for certain things. For instance, in gamma globulin shots. They're dishonest, and there is real trouble on the blood issue at the headquarters in New York.
Will Jehovah's Witnesses phone in to call you antichrists and heretics? Or will they not associate with you in public now?
They will not, and I would think many will not call in. Now and then I think you'll find somebody that feels strongly enough that they'll address the question to you and not speak to us.
You give me a telephone number. You want to gather dissident Jehovah's Witnesses in this area?
We want to leave a number where anyone can contact who is in difficulty.
I'm in the middle here.
Very good.
How do I know which sect has the right God? I haven't yet made my final choice.
Well, we wouldn't
give the number.
We wouldn't ask anybody to turn to a sect, but to Christ. The number is 420-2258.
And you know my number's there. See what kind of reaction we get to these two anti-Jehovah Witnesses?
Not anti-Jehovah's Witness.
Ex-Jehovah Witnesses.
Ex-Jehovah's Witness. Yeah.
Outspoken ex-Jehovah Witnesses.
All right.
And now outspoken Christians.
After the break. two ex-Jehovah Witnesses, Peter Gregerson from Gadsden, Alabama, and Mr. Penton. Dash, I've got a problem with your name this morning. Jim Penton from Lethbridge, Alberta. Tell me about the finances. Is it a wealthy organization with vast money like some of these evangelical foundations, vast universities, and compulsory tithing?
No, it isn't. And one of the best things that could be said about Jehovah's Witnesses is that in general the organization has not been a money-grubbing organization, but they do exploit their workers, and in late years they have gotten into the stock market, and also we've looked at their returns in Ottawa within the last few years, and unlike the past, and anyone can check this out for himself, unlike the past, they show much more penchant for material gains than they did 10 or 15 years ago.
Why are they being so tough now on backsliders? They weren't so tough before.
Many, many, many people among Jehovah's Witnesses are starting to think, and they take a piece of paper and a pencil, and there's a teaching that says that the generation, they take Jesus' words, "This generation shall not pass away till all things are fulfilled." They claim that the generation of 1914, the people that were alive in 1914, will still be alive when the end of the world comes. That included the 60-year-olders, the 40-years, the 20-year-olders of 1914. Now, at this point, the 20-year-older that was of 1914 is like 88 years old.
88. Also, therefore, those who are going to surround God are near death.
Yes, and there are not many left, and they're stuck with this primary teaching that says this generation will not pass away till the end of the world comes.
So the end of the world must come now.
It must come very quickly.
To fulfill the prophecy and maintain their dogma.
They're already trying to figure out a way, I know this for a fact, to try to figure out a way to change the doctrine, but because of what's going on, the ferment, the people starting to think, they're very much afraid of it. So they don't want me to be talking with anybody. They want to build a 13-foot wall around me.
In other words, now to maintain the faith, they're going to have to make the 1914 date later and bring the end of the world further down the road.
Exactly.
Otherwise,
Exactly.
they lose all their adherents who have a
Exactly.
chance to be at the side of
And they've
God.
done that in the past, but it's a little tougher in today's world. There are more thinking people, more skeptics.
And people like you talking on television to vast numbers of people.
That
That's
may help.
right.
That may
Without
help.
a blessing of Jehovah's Witnesses. I hope they don't tag me as an antichrist.
No. I'm sure they don't think that.
Go ahead, please. Keep it short, sharp, and succinct. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you.
Yes, I'm an atheist actually, and I was visited by a number of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I have allowed them through my door to have discussions because I wanted to understand what it was.
What's your point?
My point is that I have had discussions about their religion. They have mentioned the 1914 date, and I've asked them, look, if in the event that this does not come to pass, what is your excuse going to be then? And they said, but it will. And I said that I'm going to wait until the year 2021, and everybody is going to be dead then. And then, undoubtedly, there's going to have to be another date.
Fair enough, you're right. What with Reagan, however, and Brezhnev, and who knows what in the Middle East, the Jehovah's Witnesses could be closer to right than we think. Go ahead, please.
Yes. My parents are Jehovah's Witnesses, and for several years now, they've encouraged me to Bible studies and whatnot. And mind you, though, I have had several of them, but I myself do feel that if I was ever to become religious, that I would be a Jehovah's Witness. But at the same time, what I can't understand, pardon me, that you're saying is that you found fault with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Is that true?
Very definitely.
Boy, did they ever.
Yeah, okay, but now, see, what I can't understand, okay, I don't have a deep enough understanding of their religion, but from what I've seen from the Bible studies and from going to their studies and to their book studies and theocratic school, is that, like anything that they've said, they've always showed it to me in the Bible.
Okay, there you are. She's convinced.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here, because I know how entrancing it is, how fascinating and how pleasant it all looks.
How secure it can
and
be.
the security that it gives. I understand all of that very, very well.
And to this girl you say briefly what?
I say to her there's nothing but pain and disillusionment and heartache down the road.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster?
Yes?
This is Steve Woodward of Canadian Agnostic Society.
Well, you're not involved in the Jehovah's Witnesses, and now what can you offer to this except to attack all religion?
No, I just want to ask a question to Mr. Gregerson and Mr. Penton.
Okay, ask the question.
Okay, to the two of them. Now, you both claim to have outgrown the brainwashing of the Jehovah Witness belief. I wonder if you maybe might not believe that a further maturity would have you
Outgrow all religious belief and become an agnostic.
Well, that has not happened. I have no idea of what may or may not happen, but the contrary is true with me. I find greater satisfaction and love for the Holy Scriptures. My own personal relationship with Christ in God is better than it ever was during the 50 years that I was a Jehovah's Witness.
Ditto. All I can do is echo that.
Go ahead, please.
Morning, John.
Morning.
Yeah, you mean to say that if the witnesses come to your door, and if you're another religion, that they believe that it's the work of the devil?
All other religions are called Babylon the Great. Every other religion on the face of the earth has its origin in Satan the devil.
Well, they better not come.
Not just the Roman Catholic Church. No, seriously. Not just the Roman Catholic Church.
All other religions.
All Babylon.
Babylon the Great.
Yeah, well, I'm not Catholic.
Okay, bye. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yep.
Yeah, there's two things that really bother me about the Jehovah Witnesses. I find them highly critical of all government policies, and yet they take no part in the vote of the country. And the other thing that bothers me is that I have people, family, in the prairies that live by the Bible. And yet I'm told by Jehovah Witnesses that these people, although they live according to the Bible, have no place in heaven.
Okay, hold on, ma'am. Two very good points. Let's take the first one first,
Well,
though.
let him take the first one.
You take the first one.
I think he can do better.
What was the first point?
The first point, I think, was on the witnesses' separation of church and state and their belief that there should be no involvement in politics. Yes, that's a common stand taken by a lot of religions, but while I don't think that there's anything wrong with that particular position, what I do think is wrong is the way that Jehovah's Witnesses have condemned everybody and been so completely legalistic about the whole matter and so thoroughly unloving. So I would agree with the lady in her response to their unloving behavior over the whole matter.
In other words, they will use the laws to fight Duplessis, but will take no part in changing the law.
Essentially, that's right.
And as far as this matter of what happens to all the other people, now we've talked about all other religion. Now the fact of the matter is, Jehovah's Witnesses teach that every man, woman, and child will be killed at Armageddon who is not one of Jehovah's Witnesses and be dead. Now, and a short time ago, the president of the Watchtower, in a talk to a French assembly in New York, in answering a question on this, said as to why little babies and children that have never had a chance to buy a Watchtower magazine should be killed forever, said, well, little rats become big rats.
It's an arrogant religion. One more short segment with the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses after the break. The calls are good, but to Peter Gregerson from Gadsden and to Mr. Penton from Alberta, what happens to your friends when you resign? What happens to your life when you resign from the Jehovah's Witnesses after a lifetime?
Well, that was one of the things that caused me so much anguish. First of all, I had to decide what would happen to my children and my grandchildren and those yet unborn, and that was a serious matter. And on a practical level, I had to ask myself, since for 50 years, all my life, I'd been a witness, Every friend in the world that I had, and every real friend, was a
Cut you
Jehovah's
off.
Witness. And to say goodbye to those people that I love so much, and to know that they were going to turn away from me, was not an easy thing to face up to.
What interference do they have in marriages?
Oh, it's quite terrible. Up until 1972, the only ground for divorce was adultery. And if a woman was married to a man who was a homosexual or committing bestiality, she still had to render the marriage dues to him. Then in 1972, that was broadened to include such acts as a basis for divorce. Then they went on in 1974 and began to stipulate what married couples could do in their own bedrooms, and the elders had to get up before the congregations and talk about the horrors of masturbation and oral and anal sex. And if a woman didn't like her husband's approach to her, she could not only divorce him, but he would be excommunicated. And then in 1979, they turned around and said, well, the Bible doesn't say anything about this in the Bible, or these matters. And as a consequence of that, here were people who had been excommunicated, had had their marriages broken up by what they later admitted themselves was false doctrine, but never a word of apology to anyone.
Did a witness being divorced go through the civil courts?
Yes, that's right.
That's one thing they accept.
Yeah.
Quite incredible. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Hello, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. I'm not particularly offended when they come to my door. They seem to be quite genteel, but that doesn't take away from the fact their doctrines might be wrong. But it says that there are many ways to heaven. Were it not so, I would have told you. And I'm sure that in every religion, there are the negative and the positive parts.
In other words, you don't think they're nearly as bad as Mr. Gregerson and Mr. Penton say, is that correct?
I don't think that he's God, and I don't think he should be judging. I personally feel that there are many Christians in the Jehovah's Witness. The Lord will look into their heart. I'm sure that there are people who have never seen the inside of a church that, in the sight of the Lord, are true Christians. I think it's the philosophy of your own life, and I think that him sitting there no more makes him a Christian by judging other people. We're told in the Bible, if you judge other people, you will likewise be judged. My Bible also tells me...
Okay, don't quote the Bible to me. Your message is clear. Peter.
Beg your pardon?
Don't quote any more. Go ahead, Peter.
I think she makes some good points. And if she understood me to be saying that I am here with a view to judging as though I could do what God alone can do, that's not my purpose at all. I understand the heartache and the trauma, the problem of disengaging from a religion that has become so harsh and so arrogant in its use of power that to become enmeshed with it can cause tremendous problems for your children and your grandchildren and your marriage partner. I know.
Go ahead, please.
Hi there. Just wanted to say the law came through Moses, but grace and truth through Jesus Christ. Jim Penton, I talked to you about last year sometime. My name is Jerry Wise, and I just wanted to say to you, may God be with you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, please.
Yes. I'm really glad that you guys are really up on that program, and I'm really pleased that you are talking about this because it is such an important issue. I have two questions, and I will hang up. One is that how does the Watchtower Society explain the gifts of the Holy Spirit and also by salvation by faith and not works? And the other question is, did anyone ever tell you or read to you about the book 30 Years of Watchtower Slave? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, who wrote the book 30 Years of Watchtower Slave?
A fellow by the name of Schnell, who was a former Watchtower circuit overseer in both Germany and the United States. Yes, I've read it many years ago. On the answer of, with regard to faith and works, that was one of the things that I got in trouble for, that Ray Franz got in trouble for, because I said that salvation is through faith and not through works. And the Watchtower Society, and I can document this, teach both doctrines at the same time and don't even know that they're contradicting themselves.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Speaking to the gentlemen both, I'd just like to say I have watched one particular mother in question, actually literally let her son die because of refusal of blood transfusion. I feel this was a great injustice when there's so many parents in the hospital fighting for the lives of their children, including myself. But also I would like to ask for your phone number that you repeated.
Okay, we'll give the phone number at the end of the program. Well, gentlemen, you'll continue on your evangelical campaign to attack the dogma and the dangers of the witnesses. Is that correct?
And not the people, not the ordinary witness at all.
You regard it as an evil organization because they regard you as an antichrist.
Not for that reason, because it does produce evil, in truth.
That's right. I agree completely, because it teaches false prophecy, false history, and really, if you want a description of the Watchtower Society and the leaders thereof, the best place to go is Jesus' condemnation of the scribes and Pharisees in Matthew 23.
Well, to witnesses watching this morning, when one of the big shots come in from the east or up from the south, be happy to give them equal time. My thanks to Peter Gregerson and my thanks to Mr. Penton. And I'll be back with a serious little discussion of Canada's new mini-criminal code for children, youngsters, after the break. Danny Robinson is the Director of Corrections for British Columbia, and Peter Whelan is a Program Analyst in the Attorney General's Department, right?
Yes, I report to Bernard, yes.
This morning you report to me. The new Juvenile Young Offenders Act is in its second reading in Ottawa. Now, this new Young Offenders Act has been hanging around for 50 years. And I don't know if it'll ever pass through the House of Commons, but there have been many defects in it for many years. And I want to ask Mr. Robinson and Mr. Wielan to tell me, just give me a summary of the new Young Offenders Act and what good, if any, it's liable to do.
Well, Jack, we're seeing it at this point as both a good news and a bad news bill. And right now it looks like the bad news is overwhelming the good news. What it does, in effect, is to take juvenile justice and take it out of a child welfare model and put it into a justice model. That is to say that instead of treating kids simply as if they're troubled and in need of care and help, it really says there are rights and responsibilities that kids have to attend to. The way in which that direction is getting translated into law now, though, makes it terribly complicated, terribly legalistic, and terribly costly.
To put it simply, therefore, it is a form of a mini-criminal code for young offenders on federal offenses only. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
What offenses, therefore, will not be covered by this, but will still be covered by provincial statutes?
Well, the more typical ones, Jack, would be Motor Vehicle Act offenses, any kind of a moving driving infraction, Liquor Act, possession of liquor, alcohol. Those are the most typical. There are a range of lesser statutes.
Bylaw infractions, municipal statutes, and all that kind of thing.
Yes.
Now, in what way is this a good bill for youngsters?
Well, we think it's a good bill in terms of its direction, Jack. We think that when you intervene into the life of a kid, you should be clear about why you're doing it. If you're doing it for the protection of the public, the kid should know that, and the public should know that. Under the old bill, there was confusion about that. It looked like when you intervened because of a public concern, that you really were trying to pretend that it was for the kid's own sake. It was as if we're saying to him, we're sending you to Willingdon, kid, and we're doing it because we're trying to be good to you, and of course that's nonsense. The new bill makes that clear, that when you intervene into the life of a kid, you're doing it for the sake of the community.
Well, the common outside look at juvenile justice at the moment is that up till 17 they can do whatever the hell they like, get away with it, and that they don't face the facts of life until they're past 17. Would you agree with that at the moment?
That certainly is the popular view, Jack, and that's been made a greater problem by the fact that 16-year-old drivers, for example, don't come under provincial legislation. So that's one of the advantages, perhaps, of the direction of the new bill, that the 16-year-old driver, and if the age moves up, the 17-year-old driver, can be dealt with under provincial legislation. So the point system and the fine system could apply to him.
Oh, right at the moment they can't be?
No, not to the 16-year-old.
And is it this act which gives them more responsibility under even driving offenses?
No, the driving offenses are left to the province. It's the criminal code offenses, but we won't have to deal with provincial offenses under a federal statute. But dealing with the act itself, the thing that concerns us is that while it's focused on rights and responsibilities of kids, it ties these up greatly in complex legal processes. It means, for example, that a kid not only might be represented by counsel at the time of his trial, but also at the time of his arrest, at the time of consideration of any informal or diversion processes, at the time of trial, at the time of later review of his case, if he moves from Willingdon to an open setting, a less secure setting, and at the time of review. So he might be represented by counsel 5 times through the course of his being handled by the court.
That's impossible.
It's impossible in terms of costs and a number of other things, and could tie up justice processing terribly in this province.
In other words, it does become, as they're saying, a mini criminal code.
Well, I think the thing it does, Jack, is it formalizes the process, and if you would like to describe it as that, it may well be something closer to a criminal code than what we've had. I think the shift is, as Bernard says, away from a child welfare, parenting.
Does it mean this, that if a youngster of the appropriate age is arrested for a charge under our criminal code, right, the broad criminal code, that you've got to go through the whole business of counsel, if necessary, at the time of arrest, counsel at the hearing, appeals, venues, Court of Appeal of BC, Supreme Court of Canada?
All those and more, Jack, because it introduces some extra court appearances or quasi-court appearances for kids. Introduces them at the time when any diversion might be considered, introduces them when movement from one level of custody to another is considered, and introduces them at the point of release if he's to go out back into the community.
One is a civil libertarian, if one is a pure civil libertarian, cannot argue against equal justice for anybody in this society regardless of their age.
Well, one can, Jack, and it's difficult to take the position that I take with the bill because I may sound like I'm anti-civil libertarian. In fact, I'm not. The provisions of the new code, the new Young Offenders Act, go well beyond the provisions of the Charter of Rights, for example, in giving kids access to lawyers, at not allowing statements to be taken that may have been taken under coercion. An example, Jack, if a kid is hauled into the police station for a drinking and driving offense, and his parents are called in, and his parents ream him out, and Johnny says, yes, I did it, and I'm sorry, and the police attend to that, it's likely that that statement won't be admitted into court, because it may well be seen to be taken under the duress of his parents.
Legal aid, here we come, and $1 million paid.
Exactly, Jack, and one of our concerns is the costs of the new bill. In this province, we think it will increase by 30%, somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million to administer juvenile justice.
Is there no way around this predicament?
Well, the Attorney General on Friday sent forward an urgent telex to Mr. Kaplan asking him to reconsider some of the provisions of the bill, reconsider things that we've put before him many times before but haven't yet been reflected in the bill. And it's our hope that they might be considered, some of these things amended, to reduce costs, to make it more simple for everyone involved.
One point. What is the legal age for juvenile delinquents at the moment in British Columbia?
Up to 16. 17 and above are handled in the adult courts.
17th birthday and beyond, you're in the adult court. What does this act recommend?
As of 10 days ago, it now recommends 18 and above in the adult courts, 17 and below in the juvenile courts.
So therefore, if this goes through at 18 across the country, or British Columbia, that means we get a whole new flood of 17 to 18-year-old birthdays into the juvenile system. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Jack, right now we process about 10,000 kids for criminal code offenses up to 16. The 17-year-olds will add another 5,000 to that number.
Are you telling me that under this now, that children when arrested now on offenses under the age of their 17th birthday must be cautioned by the police before statements are taken, right?
Yes.
The parents must be informed.
Yes.
They're entitled to bail.
Yes.
Bail hearings.
Yes.
It goes on forever then.
It goes on forever, yes.
I don't know.
And it's the increased complexity we're concerned about, Jack, because we don't want the juvenile justice system to come to a halt.
And you say there are more facilities in this than there are in the Charter of Rights.
Yes, much more. There's a section of this act which says quite specifically that if a statement is taken and it appears in any way to have been coerced, as in the example I gave, that it's not admissible. In the Charter of Rights it says that if anyone feels that their rights have been denied, then a court can make a judgment about that. So it goes from reasonable grounds to legislated grounds that obviously could give the streetwise delinquent and his lawyer all kinds of opportunities.
That's this Liberal government again, I'll tell you. I can see what's going to happen now. Every youngster from what age, at what age can you charge a criminal code offense?
Under the new Act 12, Jack.
I'm saying nothing. I want to see my lawyer. Is that right?
Exactly. And once a kid becomes
Am I exaggerating?
exposed,
No. Not at
I'm
all.
13 years of age, I'm streetwise, I'm picked up by the police, I'm saying nothing. I want to phone my lawyer. Is that right?
Yes. Well, the police would have to give you a reasonable opportunity, and we don't know what that means, but the police tell us reasonable opportunity could mean having counsel at the police station. So the Vancouver City Police would, in effect, have a duty counsel at the police station to whom...
Because you won't have any trouble with the ordinary youngsters who get into trouble once or twice, but with the hardcore streetwise kids, they could put us through endlessly.
But even for the ordinary youngster, Jack, it could lengthen the processing of things just because of the increased number of judicial and quasi-judicial hearings.
More good news from Benny Robinson and Peter Whelan on the new Young Offenders Act after the break. The new Young Offenders Act looks like a thing we're going to call the LEP, the Lawyers Employment Program. But seriously, let me get this quite clear. This takes all criminal offenses done by children, at the moment up to the age of 18?
17. The provision for 18, Jack, is to coincide with the 3 years from the proclamation date of the Charter of Rights. So there will be a phase-in period.
But they're planning at the moment to bring young offenders up to their 18th birthday under this program.
Yes,
Is that
that's
correct?
right, yes.
There's one good thing I see in it. Should have been done long ago. All youth court hearings would normally be open to the public and the press. That's good, isn't it?
I agree that that's a good thing, Jack. The qualifier in the bill is that a judge can determine if he feels that it's not in the best interests of the justice process that the press be barred, but that's a much better provision than having them all closed.
Well, I think that's stupid, quite honestly. I think the only bar that should be placed on the press and keeping their eyes on judges, because if we're not there, nobody keeps an eye on the judges, is that there should be no identification whatsoever of the offender prior to a certain age, unless it's a capital charge and comes to adult court.
Yes, and that provision is in the bill, Jack. Obviously, the press needs to keep an eye on all of us in the justice system, but in many respects, this bill goes so far on the civil rights side that one would think that we had been running a justice system for years that had a malicious intent, and I don't think that's the case. I think one can generally trust the judges in spite of your feeling that they need to be watched.
Oh no, I'm prepared to trust judges, but if there is not an outside independent member of the public there, civil servants don't tend to tell the public what a good reporter might tell the public about any particular set of proceedings.
Clearly, it's appropriate to have a window on all those kind of proceedings.
Now, what about photographing and fingerprinting of these young offenders under this act? What would happen under the new act?
Well, there are records destruction provisions there, Jack, that after 2 or 5 years, depending on the offense, that all records kept by any agency dealing with the youth, and those agencies extended in the treatment and care of the youth, would be required to destroy their records. Now, the difficulty with that, you can imagine administratively, is it really conjures up a nightmare for us. The other problem, again, it seems to go beyond the adult system where one can apply to have their records destroyed after a period of time, but this becomes an automatic procedure. So we have to keep track of all of the records and to be able to know when a crime-free period has expired.
There is one good thing, though, about this mini criminal code, perhaps. Up to now, we've had a very informal setting for all offences, to wit, having committed 2 rapes and 1 murder, being a delinquent, right?
Mm-hmm.
What will happen to that kind of offence now, because we've got Olson's waiting to happen, every society has. How will that kind of offence, say 2 rapes and a murder, how will that be dealt with any differently than under the present informal system?
Well, Jack, specifically, the Act provides for a child to be raised to adult court, for example. If it's a heinous enough event that it should be handled in the adult court, he can. That provision exists now, as you know.
Yeah, now it does, I realize that.
But if he's handled totally under the juvenile system, and there are a number of offenses, as you describe, he can be sentenced to up to 2 years on each of 2 sentences consecutively. So he could be sentenced to a total of 4 years.
As a delinquent?
As for the offense itself. He doesn't go through the process of being declared delinquent under this Act. The Act is offense-specific, so he will be convicted of the offense. If he's convicted of an offense that is a capital crime for which an adult would be sentenced to life, he can be sentenced for up to 3 years. So there are those specific sentencing provisions within the Act.
Well, now, are there sentencing-specific provisions in the present Act?
Well, not really. I think The limits in terms of the present act are that a person can be sentenced up to the age of 21. So there are no specific penalties.
So that's one good thing about it. The youngster who had committed such a crime would be specifically charged and, after all the legal procedure, properly convicted and sentenced to a maximum of 2 and 2.
2 and 2, yes, or 3 for a single offense, 2 and 2 for 2 offenses. And we think that's a good feature of the bill too, Jack, because one of the problems of the old act was this indeterminate sentencing provisions. It said that anyone who was guilty of a capital crime or indeed of truancy could be convicted and defined as a delinquent and given an indeterminate period of incarceration up to the age of 21.
So at least they'll wipe out this nonsense of a conviction as a delinquent for truancy and or immorality, will it?
Yes.
Exactly, and that's the principle that we think the bill is well founded on. It's when the principle gets confounded and trammeled with the complexities that they've brought to bear on it that give us great difficulty.
But what you're afraid of, obviously, is the fact, one, the cost.
Costs are a very real factor.
When it goes up from, as it will, you say, from 17th birthday.
Oh, I'm sorry. The total costs presently are $66 million. It'll go up another 20. And that's not including the raising of the age. All of these.
Is that for the country or for us?
That's for us. That's
for BC, the cost will go up $20 million. It's hard.
You got to be joking.
No, that's true.
That doesn't include raising
You're saying
the age
it
to
now
18.
costs, for these kind of offences, $66 million to handle, administer these offences.
Yes.
Yes, so that's police costs, defense costs, Crown Counsel costs, court costs, correction costs.
So
66 million totally.
And you're not exaggerating by an extra $20 million.
We don't think we're exaggerating at all, Jack. We think that those are the costs that are going to be related to changes in police procedures that are going to be required, increased use of lawyers, both for Crown and defense, that are going to be required, the records provisions that Peter Whelan was referring to, where we have an obligation to expunge records, not simply to respond to requests that they be expunged, and corrections costs for new programming, for lengthier periods in remand on custody. All those things together look like a $20 million bill, plus the bill for the change in age.
But you're arguing against motherhood.
We're arguing against motherhood relative to the, perhaps, some of the civil liberties provisions. But I think all of us know, Jack, that civil liberties can be as confounded by legalisms and legalistic approaches as anything can be.
Well, justice even more so.
Justice can be confounded by its own red tape just as bureaucracies can be.
Well, it's not a very bright outlook, is it?
Well, I don't know. I think perhaps for the moment we seem to be obsessed with costs and with the fact that the due process has gone too far. I think we should say on the positive side that the position of British Columbia has been one of general support for the changes in principle. And what we're really talking about is a question of degree. We're not against due process. We're against the extent to which due process is applied.
Just to sum up quite briefly here, this bill, when it passes, will it pass?
The Solicitor General seems committed to a rather speedy passage of the bill, Jack.
Would formally give all children charged with criminal code offences of any kind the full legal rights and privileges enjoyed by adults, including bail, hearings conducted under the rules of evidence, no more of now, did you do it, Johnny, don't do it again, right? The right to an indeterminate sentence, the rights to lawyers at all level, and the rights to appeal conviction and sentence.
All of which we're satisfied with, Jack, but it goes well beyond those things as well.
I don't know, I suppose it's good, isn't it?
Well, it won't be good, Jack, if kids begin to think that they can deal with their responsibility simply by getting involved in the gamesmanship of the courts.
In other words, if they can deal with the responsibility in the same gamesmanship used by adults in the system.
And even going beyond that used by adults in the system.
There are more provisions for them in this than there is in the Charter of Rights.
Many.
I'd like to have you back again and do some further exploration of this on another occasion. My thanks to Peter Whelan from the Attorney General's Department and to Bernard Robinson, Director of Corrections for the Province of British Columbia. And I'll be back with John Evans, a Liberal from the East, after the break. John Evans used to teach economics, finance to be specific, at the University of British Columbia. Then he went into public service for 5 years, and you survived that.
That's right.
What were you doing in the public service?
I was Director of Research and Evaluation for Consumer and Corporate Affairs.
Was that in Basford's day?
No, I went through 4 ministers, as a matter of fact. I shouldn't put it that way, but that's exactly what happened. We had,
and then you had the misfortune to run for Parliament. Which city at what time?
Ran in Ottawa Centre in 1979.
And had the greater misfortune to win?
Well, I didn't consider it a misfortune. I still don't.
And you are, of course, a Liberal.
Oh, yes.
And what is your present position? Answer the question, witness.
I'm Parliamentary Secretary to Mr. McEachern.
Oh, God help you. And are you the fellow we see sitting behind the Prime Minister in the House of Commons with an alert smile on your face?
Sometimes alert, but usually a smile, yes.
How can you come out here as an ex-Vancouver guy and dare to announce you're a Liberal on the West Coast?
Well, I think that liberalism is based on the principles. It's not on, on difficult decisions that we have to make as a government right now.
Not on your performance.
Well, it's based on our performance, too, and I think our performance is going to be a lot better than people expect.
And I mean,
over the
any
next couple of
decent
years.
philosophical Liberal should stand by you come hell or high water.
No, that's not the way we've operated in the past, and I don't think it should be the way we operate now. I mean, if changes are required, then Liberals should let us know that changes are required, and we'll listen.
Well, not wishing to show any respect to your principal, your minister, can you disabuse me of the belief that I hold very strongly, that one, he'd never seen the budget before and didn't know what he was reading when he read it?
No, that's not true at all. I went through the whole process with him, and it started really in October 1980.
You read the budget. You knew what was in the budget.
Well, I was with him in the briefings, and then the last days before the budget was presented.
And didn't you realize that you were at that time wiping out up to $1 billion worth of construction by your killing of the MURBs, on which you had to backtrack within 6 days?
Now, the soft cost problem was definitely one that was an oversight, and it's been admitted and was corrected the following Monday after the budget. But
6 days.
MURBs were scheduled to disappear as of December 31st, 1981, unless they were extended, and we had decided not to extend them quite early on.
Not realizing there was a housing shortage and a great incentive for people to be involved in building units for the housing shortage.
Well, there's some problems with the MURBs. The people at UBC and the Urban Land Economics Group have shown that, in fact, the people that bought MURBs really don't get that much of a benefit. The benefit goes to the people that own the land that is used for building the residential
units. That's right,
units.
the forward tax write-offs.
That's right, but the tax write-offs are usually presumed to go to the person who buys a unit in a MURB. But in fact, they've been able to show at UBC that the benefit doesn't go to the person who buys the MURB, it goes to the person who sold the land to the developer.
You're using liberal diversionary tactics. The fact was you had to back down after 6 days.
Well, on the soft cost, certainly. That was an error, and we recognized it. And
yeah, you had frozen all the building.
That's right.
And you'll probably, if the economy picks up at all under the Liberals, you'll probably reintroduce them next year.
No, I would think not. I think we've seen enough now as to the exact effects that they have and where the benefits go.
Why did you attack the working man in the budget?
Well, it's not, I don't think we did attack the working man. We had to raise revenues. There was no doubt about that. And how do you raise revenues? We could have increased tax rates, and that would have hurt a lot of people who do not use the legitimate tax avoidance mechanisms.
You made a very sharp attack, absolutely infuriating decent people like the IWA by attacking and imputing tax on benefits set at arbitrary levels with the federal government's permission.
Well, in the Income Tax Act, as it has existed for a very long time, there's a very clear statement that benefits that are paid by or given by an employer to an employee will be considered as income, whatever their form. And that's been there for many, many years. Administratively, you can't collect tax on all the benefits because the administrative costs would oftentimes exceed the revenue.
Just as an aside, did you back down on airline passes for the employees of airlines and their many relatives?
No, I don't consider we back down on that. Again, it's an administrative problem. How do you value a seat that is
But have you made up your mind? If I work for Air Canada,
yes.
Okay, I'm working for Air Canada. I get so many trips a year. My husband's a wealthy accountant, we'll say, for instance, but he still gets the trips.
That's true.
Now, how do you tax that? Do you tax them both on the lowest possible fare, imputed income in their hands?
No, because if you did that, those passes are usually on a space available basis. So only if there's an empty seat can they go, and they can be bumped anywhere along their flight. So if you have a confirmed seat and you're paying less than 50% of the standard fare, then it's a taxable benefit. Otherwise, it's not.
Or in other words, if the airlines make sure the employee gets on the plane but shows it as an empty seat, they get it for free.
That's one way of looking at it, but I would presume they would not do that.
Does that include their mothers and fathers and grandmas and grandpas and children?
Whatever it is involved in in the
If
particular
they go on
past
a
privileges.
standby and a non-stop flight from here to London, but I'm sure they find empty seats as necessary, it's not taxable.
It's not taxable as long as they don't have a confirmed seat.
Next one. And Jack Monroe is still baffled about this. If I'm a logger in a camp outside of away from my home, I pay $2.50 a day for 3 magnificent meals, all the food I can eat, and it costs the company for that about $60. But he only charges me $2.50. I'm the logger. What tax do I pay on that benefit?
Well, there's benefits of that kind are taxable under circumstances where you are, where they're provided by the employer within the area of your residence or your normal residence. If you live in Vancouver and maintain a residence in Vancouver, but you have to go to Trail or someplace else on a temporary assignment, which can be for quite a lengthy period of time, and the employer then pays for your meal and your lodging. In fact, we've liberalized the benefits that can be paid non-tax with non-tax status under those conditions.
Liberalized. In other words, if I'm paying if I'm getting room and board for $2.50 a day, and it's costing the employer $60 a day, there is no tax in my hands as an IWA man.
Unless you're that's a permanent residence and a permanent location.
I'm working in a camp.
Okay, it's temporary. No, it's not taxable.
Not taxable.
No.
Again, ask the question, witness, because Monroe will be nagging me about this in due course.
No, that's my clear understanding, and I've gone over this a couple times. That
in other words, anywhere when I'm shipped out of town,
outside of 50 miles from your residence, if you maintain your residence,
even if it costs the employer $100 a day and he only charges me a nickel, I'm not imputed the cost of that food.
No, that's my understanding. That's correct.
Okay, you're committed to that.
I'm committed to it.
More with John Evans. In fact, you can talk to her. Have we taken any phone calls this morning? Or just the Antichrist? Well, I'm not going to put that description on John Evans just because he's a liberal. After the break. John Evans, quite a nice fellow, liberal from Ottawa Centre. How do you stand living in that town after being in the old Piola out at UBC?
Well, I like it. It's a very, very mixed and rich culture with the French and the English mixture. I've come to enjoy that very much. In fact,
bilingual?
I married a Francophone when I got back there.
And you're bilingual?
Yes.
Bloody good show. Go ahead, please.
Hello, John.
Yes.
These contingent air passes for employees of Air Canada, I don't think these things are right at all, because a full plane costs more to lift off the ground than an empty one, and when you're saying that the seats are empty anyway and it doesn't make any difference, it does make a difference. All Canadians own that airline, and there's no reason that employees for Air Canada should get a free flight any more than any other Canadian. Why should they?
No, what I said was if they are on a standby basis, and the marginal cost of that is very hard to determine. That's what the tax would be.
It's not hard to determine at all. Are you telling me that a full plane costs the same amount as an empty plane to lift off the ground? You're crazy.
No, what I'm saying is, how do you calculate the marginal cost of putting a 145-pound woman on that plane?
You can calculate that easy. Talk to the ramp supervisor. He does it all the time with baggage.
Well, she uses 3.5 gallons of high-level JP4 between here and London.
Listen, Canadians are paying for that, and it's not right. It's highly discriminatory, and don't say the other airlines do it, because the other airlines are private airlines. They can do what the hell they want with their employees. But all Canadians are paying for that. It's highly discriminatory, and it's not right.
Well, the difficulty, the administrative difficulty of trying to say what is the value of a bumpable flight is...
It's easy to figure out.
Do liberals have principles, or do they not have principles?
Absolutely.
He nailed you to the cross. Go ahead, please. Where are you?
Hello?
Hello.
Are you there?
I'm here. It's not Shirley McLaughlin again, is it?
Pardon?
Do you know who Shirley McLaughlin is?
No.
You don't? She's the leader of the Liberals in BC. I've never seen her. She phones me. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you.
I'm 10 years old, and I feel that in a little bit, in a couple of years, that...
Oh, now, just a minute, love. What do you want to tell me now? I took the wrong number, and I did not cut that 10-year-old off. John Evans did. That's a joke. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack.
Yes.
I would like to ask Mr. Evans, why on that vote last Friday did Monique Begin and the rest of the people that wrote that memo to the Minister of National Defense, to the Minister of Finance, when the vote came up, they went against what they had written?
Well, the vote was on a matter of confidence in the government. And that means that if you do not vote on, in our case, if you don't vote with the government, then the government falls and we go to an election. And I think the practical realities of politics are that we can achieve what they wanted in that letter. And in fact, programs are being introduced now to do that on job sharing and work sharing and so on. And the results will come, but that doesn't mean that we vote against the government in principle, and therefore go to an election.
I'll tell you what it shows me. It shows me that a politician cannot stand up to his convictions.
You mean Monique Begin and one other one? Who was the other one who signed it?
7 of them, Jack.
9.
9.
9.
They can't stand up to their convictions. If
And
they
the
think
reason-
one thing and vote another way,
Well, there's a big difference between
thinking and voting.
No, between believing in a certain course of action for a certain policy and voting against the government itself in all of its aspects and going to an election.
But you will admit to me, John Evans, that it was somewhat embarrassing for the Quebec Liberals, including Monique Begin, none of whose staff know us. They've never heard of the West Coast. Monique knows, but her staff doesn't know us. You might tell our staff that when you get back, that there's a little place out in the West Coast where we do television programs, and sometimes even the Prime Minister comes on, but they don't know it. But the fact was that Monique signed this critical letter.
That's true.
And Pierre, at a later date, after a proper pause, said, if I get any more letters, they better be letters of resignation. That was what came out of the caucus, reputedly. And I can understand that, because you can't have people backstabbing you in public, can you?
No, that's right. I agree with that.
See? Fair enough. Mind you, Monique had to vote round this time or she'd have been out of the cabinet. Go ahead, please.
No, Mr. Evans, some years ago, Ron Basford was minister, and was it you that was employed to find a solution to inflation by Mr. Basford?
No, it wasn't me.
John, I'm sorry I had to squeeze you down to the last couple of segments, because apart from that, you seem to be quite a bright fellow.
Well, thanks very much.
And I hope we have you back again soon.
I'd sure love to come.
I'll be back after the break. The credit. Webster always keeps a promise. I got a phone call last week from Rita Julian in Barriere, BC, announcing they were going to picket the Legion. What's the Legion branch number?
242.
242 this morning at 8 o'clock. Did you picket them?
Yes, we did. The girls are out there right now picketing.
How many girls are on the picket line?
4.
What wages did they get from what range to what range?
Okay, I've got waitresses are getting $4 and $4.50 an hour. Second mixologist is getting $6.50, and the first mixologist is getting $7.
What union is involved?
It is called the Bartenders Union Local 40.
Is this a properly legal strike?
Yes.
Did you go through negotiations?
Yes.
Did they give you any reasonable offer?
No, they gave us on a $4, they gave us 48 cents in the first year.
What would you be getting if you were in Vancouver instead of a $4 rate?
Okay, it would be $7.64 that girl would be making.
All right, can the Legion in Barriere, that delightful little place between Kamloops and Clearwater, could they afford to pay you these wages?
Yes, they can.
Now that will you stay on picket at the Legion all day and all week until you get a new meeting?
We'll stay there for 4 years until we get what we want.
Well, now, are you just newly certified?
Yes, we were certified on November 12th.
What does the management say about their inability to pay?
They just laugh at us right now, and also they've been harassing us.
Okay, we'll leave that for later. You're now picketing the Canadian Legion in Barriere. Is another place where the old soldiers can have a drink?
Yes, go to Herbie's.
What's Herbie's, the pub?
Yes, it's a hotel.
Okay, Rita Julian, I'm not wishing you bad, I'm not wishing you good, but when they strike the Legion in Barriere, we've got to let people know. I'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely.